So Albert Einstein said years ago, if the bee disappeared off the face of the earth, man would have only 4 years to live. That tells you how critical the bee is, particularly the honeybee, is to our society. A few years ago, there was a big scare for colony collapse disorder, and we'll talk about that in session 3. But it kind of put the country in a panic mode because beekeepers were losing 35, 40, and 50% of their hives. And we'll talk about why and what colony collapse disorder is. But there's so much validity to what Einstein had to say. We do not realize how important the bee is to plant life and the existence of plant life. When you think about the farmers and the soybeans and the almonds and all of these products that we raise, you know, the honeybee is critical. So what you're doing and the adventure that you're getting into and exploring into is a very good thing. So I want you to feel good about where you are, where you're going with this. And if you're anything like me, you're going to become really passionate about how much you enjoy it. A few years ago, I had a lady, I'd taught a class, a lady from Willow Springs. She had called me one day. She'd been in my class. And she said, Dan, I think I got a problem with my bees. And I said, well, what's going on? Well, they're just bringing out a lot of, looks like little wax clippings and stuff out of their hive. And I said, are you sure? She said, yeah, I'm sure. I go down there every morning and sit down and have coffee with them. And I'm like, oh, wow, every morning. So you get passionate about it. Well, the fact of the matter is they were cleaning house, and they do that from time to time. Okay, so enjoy your journey and look forward to it. Okay, let's go back to where we were at with the hive. I've took the liberty to go ahead and set the brood box, the second brood box on top. This is my philosophy. Like I say, if you go over and you talk to Al at the store, Al likes one brood box and what we call a medium super, and that becomes his hive body. I do not take anything away from this at all. This is their home. This is where they build, they grow, they raise their young, and the queen does her work that she knows to do. So I take nothing away from that. I do not take any honey out of it. I don't take anything whatsoever. I leave this to them. I do monitor this and make sure that the queen is doing what she's supposed to do. Fill one box at a time before you add the second one, because their nature is to go up. If you put both on there like that and you start out like this, you'll find them in this top box and nothing in the bottom box. So do a box at a time, make them work their way up and stay a step ahead of them. 8 to 10 frames full, 8 to 9 frames full, you're ready for your next box. Okay? When you get this second box, now the question was, this gentleman asked me the question, how fast will they fill that box up? That's a really good question. There are several circumstances that revolve around that question. Number one is the placement of your hive. What I tell people is to pay attention to what's going on around your property. If you live in an area where your farmer's got a soybean field over here, or there's a corn field over here, or like over in Billings, there's a sunflower field over here, that's great opportunity for forage for your bees. The bees are going to produce a lot faster. But if you're wanting to set these bees in the middle of the woods where there's not any clover or any flower or anything like that, the hive's going to move a lot slower. So what's surrounding that proximity of where you live or where you're going to place your hives is pretty important to what's going on and what's going to go on with that hive. The other thing is your weather factor. You know, I told you, we had talked about, we've had a cool spring basically. Makes a difference. If we'd have hit April 1 at 75 degrees and it stayed consistent, we would have seen things move a lot faster inside this hive and they would have filled it out a lot faster. Fortunately, for most of you that are getting nukes, I like getting nukes in May because the weather is more inclined for that hive, me putting them in, and that hive taking off and going to town. Okay, so there's a lot of things that, and the other piece of it is actually the hive itself. How strong is your queen? Is she a worker? Is she teaching good temperament to her workers? A lot of that. So those are factors that regulate the growth speed of this hive, and you'll learn that as you go. Questions? Okay. Yes, sir.
I'm talking about when the bees make a nest. Why is it deep brown? The hive, the combs.
So it browns with age.
Oh.
Brood, and we'll talk about this. Brood, you can tell how new, you can almost guess the age of brood by the color of it. I mean, it ages. It's a real creamy color when it's first laid and covered over, the eggs laid and the bees covered over. It's a real creamy color, almost this color here. As that cell ages up to 21 days, it turns darker and darker and darker and brown. Same with the queen cell. A fresh queen cell is a real light colored. As it ages, 16 days, I think, as it gets up to that 16, it's turned a darker brown. Brood wax will age, it'll turn brown. That doesn't mean there's a thing wrong with it, it's just aged. Okay, I saw another, yes ma'am. Nope. Okay, anybody else? Question? Okay, so let's say we've progressed. We've put our nuke in, they've filled out the bottom box. We've worked on the second box, we've given them time, they've filled out the second box. Now we're ready to, again, expand, because we have to stay a step ahead of them. The same rule that was here applies here, 8 to 9 frames. When I get to 8 frames, I want to add and go up. I want to stay a step ahead of them. I do not ever want them to think they're running out of room, because they'll swarm on me and I don't want to lose my bees. Everybody understand swarming? Okay, swarming is when half the hive leaves. At least some say 60%. I even have seen numbers like 70%. We don't want that to happen, because it's going to reduce the production of your hive. So I usually use 2 bottom boxes. When this one gets to 8th frames, then I'm ready to super up. Now, you have to determine what you're going to do and what your purpose is with your hive. Do you want it for honey production? Do you want it strictly for pollination for your garden or your fruit trees or your orchard? What's the purpose of you having bees? Somebody tell me what your...
All of the above.
All of the above. So you want honey production, but you want the pollination as well. Anybody here wants strictly pollination?
That's a thought. I kind of.
So you remotely are thinking just pollinating your garden area and your fruit trees and whatnot. So that'll make a difference in the way you address this hive. You can continue to either go up with brood boxes if you're not interested in honey production, or you can split that hive off to create a second hive. And we'll talk about splitting a little later, but those are your options. Most of us want honey production. So this is their home. I'm taking nothing away from these 2 boxes. My second box is filled up to 8 frames. I need to add because I don't want them to get nervous about being out of room. So this is called a medium super. 7, what is it, Al? 7 5/16? Gotcha. That's a medium frame. So this is the standard of what we use and beekeepers use. This box, just for your record, will weigh about 60 pounds, 55 to 60 pounds when it's full of honey. This is called a shallow super. It's 4, actually it's 5 and something, but it holds a 4 3/4 inch frame. When we talked about 8 frames, we talked about weight, the reason for elderly ladies for the weight factor. Same case scenario with the shallows. It's a lighter box. It'll weigh 45 to 50 pounds full. One of the reasons I like the shallow is because I do a lot of cut comb, and you'll take this shallow frame and you can cut that in that frame and it fits perfect in a quart mason fruit jar. perfect. My grandfather done it for years, and I've just followed suit. So it's your option on which frame you want to use. They fill up the shallows a lot faster, of course, because of the room. But this is the medium super. Looks like this. This is where you want honey. So if I'm going to go up with my medium super, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take everything off, the lid, my screen cover, and now I'm going to place my medium super on top, just like this. Now, before I move too far, some people like to use queen excluders. I did. Some people feel like they need to put a queen excluder in between the brood box and the medium super. They do that because they do not want the queen to come up here and lay, because their nature is to go up. My theory and my experience has been, if I have two brood boxes, deep brood boxes, my queen has enough room that she does not need to go up further into the super. I had one queen over the years to go up into my super, and she laid a strip about 2 inches wide up, and that was all she did in that honey box. And I thought, oh gal, if you're that good, I'm for you. I'm not going to change a thing. And she was a very progressive queen. She was doing really well. Most of the time, if you have this much room, you won't have to worry about that. If you're not comfortable with that, then put your queen excluder in, and that gives you that insurance. Now, if you use a deep and a medium as your brood box, like we had talked about, that Al does, he'll have an issue with that because she'll want more room and she may want to go on up. So I would recommend the queen excluder then. But if you're using two deeps, I think you'll find that you'll get along fine without it. But whatever you want to do. Yes, sir.
Are there any detriments to using a queen excluder?
I've seen hives where they would not go up through it. So I've seen hives, I've placed them side by side. I had two hives that were real progressive, doing really well. It was the two hives that actually came through the winter with the screens. They were wanting, the queen was wanting to go up in my super box, so I put the queen excluders on. One hive went right up through it just perfect. The other hive, they wouldn't go through it. So I wound up taking it back off to get along with them. Most of the time they will. If you put them on there like they instruct, most of the time you won't have any problem with it. Any questions? Yes.
I just put my super on yesterday.
Okay.
And I put it in with only 9 of the frames because I was reading that makes it easier, or should I put that 10th frame back in there?
Makes it easier in what respect?
To get the honey out, that it would get too hard to get the honey out without breaking the comb.
No, there is some validity to what you're saying there. So in my supers, I use frame spacers. You can buy 10 or you can buy 9s, and they just, inside, you just nail them down, and it helps space your frames out. They are correct. When you've got 10 frames in here, they pack it so tight it does get hard. When I put 9 frames in there and space them, I'll get as much honey as I would the 10 frames because they'll draw it out a little more. The cell will be a little deeper, but I don't have the issue of tearing up my honey frames. So you did a good thing. What you might want to do is look at the 9 frame patterns in the future. That helps you space that. You also can buy a spacer. It just does this number and helps put them out somehow or another. Yeah, helps spread them out equally. So I do like 9 frames in my super. I agree with you 100%. Yes.
And that spacer stays in there, or do you just use it to begin with?
This stays.
Okay.
So you nail that in there?
Yep, takes a little bitty old pinhead nail, goes in like this, and you just nail it in. Of course, you take your frames out, and it'll sit there like this, and it spaces them out for you.
And you would get 2 of them for each end?
One of each end. Yeah, one on each end. Yep. They're 98 cents, 86 cents a piece. Now the downside to these, hive beetles can hide under these they love it. I mean, it's a good hiding spot. But I would rather deal with the hive beetles and have my good, especially if I'm doing cut comb, to have my good quality comb foundation in place, undisturbed. Yes, sir.
You know, about the spacing too, I'd heard that like when you put 9 of them in there and they're farther apart, you know, they'll build it out more.
They will.
When you go use a hot knife to cut the cappings off, you can cut it a lot easier without having to get down and tearing up into the comb.
And that's correct.
Foundation.
That is correct. They will have a tendency to draw the comb out in a deeper order. They'll fill it full. It'll never be sealed until it's full. My experience has been with 9 frames, I'll get just as much honey as I would if I had 10 frames, and a lot better looking frames. Yes, ma'am.
Where do you place your queen excluder?
So your queen excluder will go between the brood box and the medium super, or the shallow super. So what you're wanting to accomplish there is you're wanting to keep the queen from going up into your honey box and laying brood. The worker bees can pass through this. The queen's so much bigger she cannot, nor can the drones. But the worker bees can. They can ease right through it. So the objective is to keep the queen and the drones out of your honey box. Okay? Okay. Any questions? So, we've got our honey super on. We're observing. I like to check that just to see the weather's the factor, the flowering's the factor, all of that's a factor on how fast they'll fill this out. But I like to check it periodically, 10 days, week, 10 days, maybe 2 weeks, and just see how they're filling this out and doing with it. Once they have filled this box up, I have one of 2 options. I can either add another honey box, or I can take this, rob it, and put replacement frames in there so they can continue working. Now, putting up honey is kind of a messy process. And I don't like to do it 3 or 4 times a year. So what I typically do, and this is honestly, this is your call. I will, if I fill my box up, I'll put another box on. So I rob all at one time. And when I put my new honey box on, I'll put it underneath my full one. Okay? Because they're coming in here and they're going up, they don't have as far to travel. Okay? Makes it a little more difficult checking it because I have to take the full one off every time, but I'd still rather do that, and that's just my personal preference. You can do it either way. So if I'm going to leave this full honey box till fall to rob, and I need to add another box, I will take my empty and put it right under my full one, so they don't have as far up the ladder to go. Any other questions?
Would you recommend the first year to just leave the honey?
Mm-hmm. If you're buying nukes, my encouragement to you is the first year, unless you have a super prolific hive, my first year is let those bees grow and build and become strong. If you are really anxious about getting a little honey, maybe take a frame or 2. But I would encourage you to leave the honey box on for their food source through the winter. The worst thing you can do is to work all year with that nuke and then lose them in the winter. Start over. So the first year you want to make sure that your hive is established, that they're strong, that they're solid going into winter. And last year, my hive is 3 years old. I still left that super on, and the reason I did is because we had a dry fall. So I was concerned that they might not have the food storage that they need. I didn't need the honey. I had plenty of honey, so I just left it for them. The nice thing about it is what they don't use over the winter, they'll fill right back up in spring. I can take it next year. So you're not going to lose it.
If you do leave it over winter, do you take out the queen excluder then, or do you leave that in?
You can take it out. Yeah. Yeah, it's not going to serve a purpose at that point.
Cross, like for instance, you have an established hive. Can you actually take the food source, the honey from one place in another for a week or?
You can.
I didn't know if that was something.
You can, just the frame, not the bees, just the frame. Clean all the bees off and use a food source to help the weaker hive. Yes, you can. Yes, ma'am.
When you rob the hive, and then say it's September 1st, you rob the hive, do you just cap it then and then put the super on again in the spring? Or do you put the super on and let them keep going through the winter?
So there's factors that you have to weigh into that. Like last fall, we had a dry fall, so there wasn't a lot of food source out there, and that is a concern. You have to watch that they don't keep growing so much that they run out of room and swarm on you even in September, October. So if you want to, and depending on what the forage situation looks like, you can put a super back on it and just let them have it for winter stores. Okay?
Is there harm in putting it on there if they, I mean?
No.
Okay.
No. There's really not a disadvantage to it. The only disadvantage to it is if it's empty going through the winter, it's just that much more they have to heat. Okay? But if it's full, honey acts like a thermal blanket. It holds heat. Honey itself will actually be like a thermal blanket inside that hive and hold that heat in place. So there you go. That's kind of the trade-off. And a lot of this is judgment. Question? Yes.
I'm going to ask, the hive we did lose, I did leave the second deep on because it had some honey. Should I have taken that off?
This box, the second deep,
It had like 5 of them,
it's okay.
and that's the one I lost. And so I didn't know if that had
No.
anything to do with it or not.
So did the bees abscond or did they die?
They died. My hive was full of dead bees.
So were their heads sticking in the cells?
Some of them were.
They froze. Yeah.
Okay.
They had plenty of food source in the hive?
It looked like it to me.
There was plenty of honey stores?
It was, that nymph that I got was not as strong as the other.
Mm-hmm.
And it seemed like I was feeding it more when I first got it, and that's why I left the second one on. I was thinking maybe I should have taken it off and tried to put the full things in the bottom.
How many frames in the bottom were empty?
I think there were 8 frames.
Empty?
No, with honey in them. I think the 2 ends did not have anything.
They should have had enough honey stores to survive.
Okay.
So more than likely, your numbers were weak and they froze. They just didn't create enough heat to keep that hive body warm.
Okay.
Yeah. And in that case, it's hard to do anything about that. I mean, you might, if you know they're going into winter that your hive is weak, you can combine them with another hive. Take the queen out, let the pheromone dissipate for 3 days, and then combine them with the other hive. That way, when spring comes, you've got a real strong hive going out of the gate. Because either way, in this case, you're only going to have one hive come spring, And a lot of beekeepers will, if they assess that they have a weak hive and you're September, October, no queens to be bought or anything, and it's really too late to build that hive, then you need to combine it with another hive so you have a good strong hive. The best thing you can do is through the summer months assess that hive and build them as much as you can. Even if you have to start feeding them sugar water.
Which I did.
Yeah. So sometimes you can do everything you can do, and it's just.
We were just trying to figure out if I killed my bees by having that second box on there.
I don't think so.
Okay.
No, I don't think so. So, yes, sir.
So that cold spell that we had not long ago,
Mm-hmm.
did that in general have a negative effect, or if you had a strong hive, what did you do, or how did they survive?
Oh, they'll hold up. They'll just bottle up in that hive and stay warm. But it changes the complexion of the nectar flow, because I know fruit trees that were bloomed got bit. So it changed the complexion of what the nectar flow looked at. The hive itself probably survived fine, but it does change the complexion of what you've got out there in forage. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
I've seen these, like cakes that you can put
Mhm.
in your hives.
Mhm.
Is that for overwintering?
Yes.
So you don't have extra food?
Most of
Where do you put them?
So I lay them right across the top of my frame. My top box, lay it right across the top of the frame. And they come, brood patties is what they're called. They come with 2 layers of wax. They'll chew through the wax, but I peel off 1 layer of the wax and just lay it across ways on the frames, and they'll feed on it. And actually, it's really healthy. Get the brood patties with the honeybee healthy in it. I like them.
Have you ever made them? My sister and them make them.
A lot of folks do make them. Me personally, I have not. I have not had time to do that.
She said they're new into bees,
Mhm.
but they're in Nebraska, and they actually make them in
Yeah. People make a fondue. You know, there's a lot of opportunities out there that you don't have to go to the store and buy everything. You can go online and do some research. You'll find recipes. One of the things that I meant to say at the very beginning of this, and it has slipped my mind twice now, and now it's here, so I need to say it while it's here. One of the best things you can do for yourself is, as a beekeeper, join a beekeeping club. It's great to be rubbing elbows with fellow beekeepers because you learn so much. The local club here, Bees Alive Club, I was the president of it for 8 years. Those guys are awesome. They share recipes like that, fondue recipes. Loretta, one of the girls, has a sting recipe. She makes a salve for sting. They give you all kinds of information. So it's really healthy for you to be able to get involved. Now, COVID has kind of train wrecked that a little bit, but this club here locally just started meeting again this month. So they're hoping to stay in person with their meetings. There's a club in Springfield, Ozark chapter. There's clubs all around that you can get involved in. And I would encourage that. I really would encourage that, because you'll learn a lot, and it's good to rub elbows with them. I mean, you learn little tidbits of information that'll help you. And a lot of them, as a new beekeeper, a lot of them have mentors, folks that are retired that have been in beekeeping for 20 years. They love going out to your house or to somebody's house and helping them with their bees, and there's no cost to it. So there's a lot of positives there, and I'd encourage you look into that and see if that will be of help.
What was the name of the one here that you mentioned?
Bees Alive Club. They have a Facebook page. They have a website page. If you need a name and a number, I can get you in contact with any of them. The other thing is that you can help yourself as far as education is. There's a lot of good books to read. Beekeeping for Dummies is a good read, is what it is. If you have a tendency to lean toward a natural direction and you want to stay as natural as you can, this Natural Techniques is really a good book too. My favorite book is this particular book right here. Just like the Bible is the foundation book for a churchgoer, the Bible, the Beekeeper's Bible, is a great, great book for a beekeeper. I really have found a lot of healthy information, and you'll be amazed at what you learn. You can go online to Amazon, and I think it's like $28, maybe $29, but it'll have a lot of good stuff in it, and it'll take you from point A to point B in a hurry. Okay? Now, let's talk about staging our hive. We've talked about our equipment. I haven't got into a lot of the extras of the equipment. There's things like this. These are bee feeders. If you want to overwinter and feed sugar water, there's options like this that work really good. These slats float in the sugar water. You have to be really careful about water with bees because they're not very intelligent when it comes to water. They will literally drown without some protection from you. So these slats have a tendency to float so they can get to the sugar water without the risk of drowning. There are some out there that you have to be really careful of because you'll lose a lot of bees as a result of it. There's front feeders here. There's just all kinds of options. And we haven't talked about natural wax versus plastic wax, and I do want to talk about that to help you. But let's talk about staging your hive for right now. Staging your hive is very critical in the survival of your hive. The direction you want your hive to face, this is the face of the hive. You want this face pointing south to southeast. You want the north and the west behind it. I like to see my hive at least 18 inches, 16 to 18 inches off the ground. And I'll tell you why. There's not many predators that will bother a hive unless you've got a front feeder on and you're feeding sugar water. Then coons might become a problem. Down the road, they'll literally slap that bottle off of there and feed that sugar water. But one of the biggest worries and the reasons that we want the hive 16 to 18 inches off the ground is because of skunks. Skunks will literally eat bees live. And I've heard stories of where they'll actually sit there and pound on the side of that hive and eat those bees as they go. So lifting them off the ground, and honestly, for your benefit, having it 16 inches off the ground keeps you from doing this number so much, makes it easier to work that hive as well. So you've got your direction, you've got your placement. What you use for a platform is entirely up to you. Concrete blocks has been a great one over the years. I've seen lots of beekeepers take 4 8x16 blocks and crisscross them and do good. If you want to build you a frame platform, that's fine. Ants can be a problem, so you want to be mindful of that, and you want a natural remedy for ants. Cinnamon's a great fix. I had some metal platforms that I was using one year and got a bad case of ants. I covered my platform front with cinnamon, and I took old used motor oil and painted all of my frame on the platform, and that fixed my problem. So there's lots of little things like that that you'll learn as you go. Okay. Now, when we talk about staging, what's critical, we're looking at facing south to southeast. The placement of your hive is important. We talked about realizing the geographical region around you. Ideally, in an ideal world, I like to see a tree line behind my hive to protect that hive with some shade in mid-afternoon. So if my hive is facing east, the west sun in the afternoon is the hottest. If I've got trees behind me, that will give me some shade break and help my hive not get as hot. I have beekeeper friends commercially that set them right smack out in the middle of the dead hot sun, and they like it. They prefer it. Bees will keep this cool in the winter, in the summer, as same as they will keep it hot or warm in the winter. They do it by the fan process and the moisture that they have to work with by the water. So they bring water in and they fan and they create a cooling process to keep those hives cool down. If the larva gets too hot in that hive, it has the same detrimental effect as it gets too cold. So there is a temp range that they want to keep that hive. But if I can help the situation, again, my job is to accommodate. If I've got a tree line there that I can put behind me to place my hive and still have my hive facing south, southeast, then I think my advantage is to the best to do that. Questions? Yes, sir.
Best hive I ever had, the bear got it.
Bears have become a problem.
Oh, they shredded it.
Yeah, they will. They'll tear it to pieces. Electric fence is the best protection. We had the conservation department come in one night at our bee club, and he gave us the specs on how to build an electric fence to protect you from bees. And I actually think you can go online, and it's online. Yes, ma'am.
I actually have two questions. One is a water source.
Yep.
Do you need a water source fairly close?
It's nice if you can.
Okay, like within 50 feet?
I wouldn't put them right on the pond bank, but if they're within 100 yards, that's awesome.
Okay, but if you're like away from water, should you put like a bird bath or something up?
You can, but now bear in mind, so I've taken pans like these 3-gallon pans and used them as water source for my bees because I didn't have water readily available. Fill that pan up or that bird bath up with rocks so that they don't go to the edge of it and try to walk in. Give them something to land on because they're not real brainy when it comes to water. They just don't do well.
The second question is nearby farmers with cattle, if they are treating their cattle for flies, like with is that a concern?
I'm not worried about that as much as I am if your farmer's spraying for chemicals.
Okay.
So if you've got a farmer that's got a soybean field close, typically spraying soybeans doesn't fall in line with the bloom season of soybeans, okay? But if you've got a farmer next to you and your hives are right next door and he's going to spray his field, I would visit with that farmer and say, hey, it's great that you're spraying. Would you let me know when you're going to spray your field? I would then close up my hive for that day.
Okay. And you can't do that?
You can do that.
For about 24 hours?
They won't like it, but you can do it. Yeah, when you go to open it up the next day, be ready to run. It's okay. But most chemicals have about a 3-hour dry-in time. So if you can protect your hive for that day, the next morning everything should be cool. Yes.
I have a question. We're not from around here, and the mosquitoes really are not my thing. So we've always had our house treated for mosquitoes, which works wonderful. This year we're going to do bees, so we're not going to have that chemical treatment. So we decided to put go more natural way, and we're going to put bat houses around. Is there any reason that we should stay away from the hives? Is that going to hurt the hives any? No?
Nope. Now, I will say this to you. Horses and honeybees do not get along well. So if you raise horses, protect your bees. If you raise cattle and you're putting your hives out in the field, build a corral panel, a cattle panel fence or something. An old cow will come up scratching her head on this innocently and tumble it over, and you've got a train wreck. They don't mean no harm. Cattle and bees get along fine, except for the ability for them to scratch their head or their butt and knock the hive over. Horses, on the other hand, they do not get along with bees at all. So if you've got horses, keep them away from your hive.
So to kind of piggyback on the chemicals question, I was wondering, range. Where my neighbors aren't too close, but if they are spraying, it's like, what is the range that I can expect to say, like, okay, that's a little bit too close, maybe I should go have a talk and say, let me know before you spray.
Okay, so the honeybee will can travel up to 5 miles for forage, depending on the forage source and how close the proximity is. Obviously, the closer the better, the more work and the more production you get out of the hive. But you're going to have to determine that based on what's going on around you. If you have concerns, I would visit with my neighbor. If you live in a town or you've got a neighborhood in your proximity, talk to your neighbors. Before you put hives on your 3 acres or 5 acres and you're in a neighborhood or you've got neighbors within 500 yards, talk to them. Make sure that nobody is seriously allergic to bee stings. Make sure the kids Kids are notorious for coming up to these hives and playing and then getting stung and running home and crying to mommy, and we got a problem now. Okay? So you may have to take some measures to protect the accessibility to the hive. And that's okay if you do. Your investment's big. You don't want nobody to get hurt. You especially don't want kids in the middle of it getting stung. I had about a few years ago, I had some hives down at an apple orchard down in Highlandville. Rowdy kids come, they run through that neighborhood, country road, and high speeds. One of the neighbors called the law on them. They thought it was the neighbor that I had my bees on, so they pulled in there one night about 2 o'clock in the morning and went to kicking over my hives. They kicked over one hive and scattered it pretty good. When they got to the second hive, that hive put their butt in the back of the car in a hurry. The law knew who it was, and when he found that kid, that kid said, "I don't never do that again. They stung me to death." It was funny, and he deserved it. But that was ornery, but he did deserve it. We need to protect sometimes our hives and the placement of our hives. So if you have any livestock whatsoever, chickens are not a problem, but larger animals can be a problem. So if you can build whatever you need to build to protect them, please do. It'll be better for you. Yes?
2 questions. One, as far as staging and placement, structure, outbuilding, garage, anything like that, we got to stay away from that by any certain amount, or is that not important?
As long as you can get behind, whenever you're working this hive, you want to work it from the back side. Never work a hive from the front where you've got all this traffic coming in and out. If you need to be at the side, that's okay. I've done that. The back side is the most ideal, but that's the only reason I would keep in mind with the building. You want the front of the hive wide open. And answer this gentleman's question, he was wanting to put up a fence or a barricade. How far away? Give it 6 to 8 feet of clearance at least, so they can go up and over. And normally by 8 feet, they're way up in midair anyway. Okay, and they adapt. If you happen to be too close, they will adapt, but you're just creating more hardship for them. So if you can stay 6 to 8, 10 feet away, it's a lot better.
The other question I had was regarding the staging of them. In an area where you've got to do yard maintenance, cutting grass, is that going to really irritate and stress the hell out of them?
So that's a very good question. If you're in your backyard and you typically mow in that particular area, a lot of that depends on the temperament of the hive. I've seen hives where I could mow right square in front of it. I don't stop. I do keep going. And I'm okay with that and not be a problem. I mean, just like this, not be a problem. Sometimes if you do it too much, you'll irritate them and they'll come after you a little bit. But it depends on the temperament of the hive. There was somebody that had a hive that was pretty ornery. You did, I think it was, and said you couldn't get close to them. You're not going to be able to mow right there with them. So just experiment with that. When you go in front of that hive, and I've actually mowed right up under it, but I just keep trucking. I don't slow down, and I get along fine. When I weed eat from the back. So I get on the back side. I will put on a veil because those bees will come after that weed eater, and they'll just go to try to hit in that weed eater head. It's funny to watch it, but they get aggressive and they get a little aggravated.
So other than getting them aggravated, does it stress them at all negatively? Nothing like that?
No.
Okay.
No.
Based on that, should you put maybe some gravel or something down there so you don't have the weeds growing?
Very good point.
Irritate them?
So the question was, should you put gravel or something down? A lot of people put down, I've seen carpet, I've seen gravel beds, they do some ground cover there for protection and to keep the weeds down, number one. But number two, it helps control the hive beetles to some level. The hive beetle mutates and what's the word I want, Al? They produce in the ground, they evolve out of the ground and come to life and go to the hive. So if you have ground cover down, you've kind of helped protect that to some level. Okay? And that also helps your weed and your mowing down.
But if you mow in the evening and stuff, aren't they like in the hive more and you're not gonna bother them as much?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the temperament of the hive. You'll experience that
Don't they traditionally go in the evening, go back home?
about dark. But there's always guard bees on the front. And those are the guys, they do hurt when they sting. You got to watch them.
You was talking about holding down the hive beetles.
Mhm.
What if you made I know they get in the ground, that's where they lay their eggs and stuff
Pupate.
like that.
Mhm.
But what if you just made a concrete deal like that and put your hive stand on top of that?
You can do that.
That
Yeah.
would-
It won't hurt. Yeah, won't hurt at all. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
So the danger of horses is that they might knock over the hive? Is that a danger?
Well, the smell of horses is offensive to the bees. I mean, you want to see a fun rodeo. I mean, yeah. But there is some danger in them knocking over the hive, too. So I would protect my hive. Yeah. Yeah.
So if they're in another field, that's okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then also about goats or sheep, do they affect those?
The only thing I'd worry about with goats is the same as I'd worry about with cattle, them rubbing their heads or curiosity. Sheep, I'm not real familiar. I mean, obviously the bee's not going to be able to sting the sheep unless it's on the nose, but I don't know how their curiosity level is. My encouragement would probably be fence it off, just for safety's sake. It's really tough when this hive gets knocked over to rebuild it and get it back to normal. Yes.
Two questions. When you see honey marketed as clover honey or wildflower honey, how do they know that that's where it's coming from? And then the second question is, can you influence that based on, like if you have a huge flower garden and a huge vegetable garden and a lot of trees that flower, how do you place it in order to influence what it is that they're getting pollen from?
They're going to pull pollen from everything that they can. So they'll pull from all of those sources. To answer your first question is, basically when you see clover honey on the label of a jar of honey, they're depending on the fact that they have sowed fields of clover and that's what they're utilizing. What's really hard about labeling is the all natural. That aspect, or organic, is even tougher. It's really tough to validate that. But you can, there's a lot of clover in this country. White clover is one of the best sources of honey that there is. Makes a real pretty clear honey. There's just lots of opportunity. It's really hard to narrow down and define unless, like, there was a Darren 2 years ago, had 4 hives, and you may remember seeing it on 14 going toward Billings, that sunflower field. He had 4 hives working at sunflower feed. And I mean, he could have labeled and said, hey, this is sunflower honey, because they were specifically sitting right there at that field, and he could identify that. Can he do that FDA-wide legally? That's questionable in my opinion, but because he had his hives right there, he possibly could have. About 6 or 7 years ago, I had some hives in an apple orchard. The weather just worked perfectly with me that year. Had a super on. When those trees went into apple blossom, my bees worked them blossoms. I had the prettiest super of honey I'd ever had in my life, and really tasted good. One time, it's happened one time. But I called it apple blossom honey because I felt like that's what it was. It was gorgeous, beautiful. It was that kind of honey that you didn't want to sell. You just wanted to keep it. And by the way, to tell you this, King Tut, when he died, they put frames of honey in his tomb. 3,000 years later, when they opened that tomb, that honey was in perfect order, just like they put it in there. Honey does not spoil unless you get water in it, so it'll stay and last forever. Now, sometimes honey will turn to sugar because of moisture content, but we can talk about that. When the bees put honey in this comb in your super, that moisture content's about 84% water. 84%. The bees will actually fan that box and get that moisture content down to about 17% before they cap it. when you pull it out of there, you can pretty well feel comfortable that that moisture level is down. My personal experience has been when I pull them high, that super, I will put it in a room with a fan circulating, not directly on the box, but just circulating air in the room for about 3 weeks. I draw that moisture content down to about 12%. I never have a jar turn to sugar. So moisture is the key. Okay, any more questions about placement? I've got a lot of time we can talk, so if you have questions about anything, let's open up and talk, okay? Not everybody at one time.
How about the horizontal? Are you familiar with, I mean, if you were just gonna primarily use it for pollination, would that be the way to go with the horizontal boxes, or?
It would be, because you don't have, they're not as much work detail in a horizontal hive. If you're just using for pollination, yes, I'd encourage it. Yep, yeah, let them take care of themselves.
And how does that work, the migration of do they work from the center out, the end, or?
Typically, you want them working from the center out.
So you add frames as they
Yeah.
fill them up?
Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
On mine, I have 3 entrances,
Mm-hmm.
so I'm gonna start them in the center,
Mm-hmm.
just to force them
Right.
to build out.
Yeah.
I've got sides to keep them in one box, and then I can stretch the boxes as I go.
So the theory behind the horizontal hive is when you go to a bee tree, they go work from the bottom up in that tree. The horizontal hive, I think it's just a matter of, instead of it being a vertical, it's horizontal and working in the same process. But we're going to make them work out both directions. If they were in the log of a tree that was horizontal, that's what would happen there as well. Horizontal hives are a great thing depending on the circumstance and what your application is.
How would you keep the brood? Do you isolate it from the super? How does that work?
If on the horizontal, you're going to have to do it on the outsides. So if you're using it just for pollination, it doesn't matter.
Right.
But if you're wanting it for honey stores, then you're going to have to, what I understand, and I've never used a horizontal hive, but you're going to have to use your outside frames for honey stores. Because you've taught your queen to stay in the middle, basically, and gave her plenty of room to work both ways. Okay. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
The Varroa mites, how do you go about getting rid of them?
Okay, let's touch base with that. In lesson 3, we'll talk about the insects and pesticides. Varroa mites is a very serious issue in our country right now. Used to, back in the 70s, it was a tracheal mite. They've now got bees kind of bred to be able to be resistant, and we don't see a lot of tracheal mites. The Varroa mite has come on board, and it's serious. So what you have to do, what you'll see out of the Varroa mite is their season will actually start in June. You'll see the population begin in June, but as we go through the summer, that population explodes and gets bigger and bigger. They actually attach themselves to the underside of the honeybee, so they're hard to see, and it's really hard to see with a naked eye because of the size. They're about the size of a seed tick, basically. So they're a little difficult to see. Once in a while, you'll see one on the top or on the back of a honeybee, and you can recognize it. But the reason that it goes unnoticed so much is because they attach themselves to the underside of the bee, underside of the bee. They will get into the brood, and they will burrow, and they will raise in the brood as well. They feed off that brood larva, and that's why it becomes so detrimental to your hive. That hive has grown in Varroa mite population through the summer, going into the fall, it's still strong and staying stronger. Well, your hive is dialing down come October to a smaller cluster, so you get a huge number of Varroa mites, a small number of bees, and the bees feel overwhelmed and overpowered, and they abscond. Now, let's talk about how to deal with that. There's a number of different methods you can use to control the Varroa mite. You have to be mindful when you use these chemicals or these methods. You have to be mindful about when you can use them, what the temperature is when you can use them, and what you've got going on in the hive. Like some you cannot apply when there is honey stores in the hive, or it means you're supered up for honey. So what I do in my practice is after September 1, I've pulled my honey stores. That's when I become aggressive against my Varroa mite. You can use Apiguard, you can use HopGuard, you can use Apivar. There's 5 or 6. I have guys that are very good beekeepers that use oxalic acid. Randy Oliver has developed a process called oxalic acid, and it's really it's kind of like a woodworking bleach, and they fumigate, or you can drip it, or you can soak a cloth, and it's very effective. It's almost probably one of the highest effective rates against the Varroa mite of any of them, oxalic acid. The problem with oxalic acid is you have to watch your temperatures and you have to be precise with your application. You cannot overdo it or you become detrimental to the hive. So oxalic acid, while it may be one of the best and it's one of the newest and it shows a lot of good strength, you have to be very detailed to the specifics about it when utilizing it. I've seen a hive get fumigated with oxalic acid, and I see you guys are handling the fumigators now, aren't you? I seen that happen at a field day at Kelly Beekeeping in Kentucky about 4 years ago, and I swore I would never do that to my hive. They heated that stuff up and closed the hive up and fumigated that hive, and I thought, I don't know how there's going to be a live bee come out of there. It just looked tough. But a lot of guys are doing it and getting along fine with it. I have a lot of good friends that are using the dribble or drip method. You actually go down the frame with a 5 cc syringe and you just dribble it, and it does its thing from that. So the methods there, go online. Randy Oliver is the creator. You can go online or go on YouTube and look at oxalic acid application, and it'll give you the details. My choice has been Apivar for the last several years. And does a hive get resistant to the chemicals? Yes, that's probably 2, maybe 3 years is probably the longest you can get away without changing the same hive. Apivar is a 2-strip per box application. 2 strips per box. Place them in the center of the hive. 2 strips in my second box toward the center of the hive. My honey super's gone. I don't have to worry about that. And I leave them, you have to leave them in for 43, I think it's 43 days. And I've actually left them all winter. Put them down in between the frames. Slide them down in between the frames. I've seen best results with that. And to be honest with you, I do it in September, and then I come back and do it again in February. If I can find, I had an old timer one time tell me, you'll always have 7 warm days in February. He's right. So I find a warm day in February and I take Apivar strips, even though I've done it in the fall. I take Apivar strips and I do application with my hives, leave them 43 days. I'm not into honey flow issues, and my hives come out of the gate really strong when I do that practice. So I do it twice a year, and it helps my hive a lot to survive through. Yes?
Would it behoove me, we're getting nooks in 2 weeks. Would it be in our best interest to do that as soon as we get our nooks, because we don't know what kind of shape they come in?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. You're not going to have a honey flow issue. With 5 frames, I would do 1 strip. So you got 5 frames. I would just probably do the 1 strip. 2 strips are basically, I don't think you're going to hurt them with 2 strips, but 2 strips are basically for a 10 frame box. Okay. If you want to do 2, do, but I always err on the side of caution a little bit because it's an all natural chemical in this, so it's not something that I'm worried about as far as how hard it is on them. So whichever direction you want to use. I will say that this particular product, Apistan, is a very hard chemical, and you only use it if you have to, because it's really detrimental. It's really hard chemical on them. Apivar, Apivar. Hop Guard is a new one that's out. You might want to come up and talk about Hop Guard a little more than I do.
I know about it. I haven't actually ever used that, but you can use that during honey flow.
That's what I thought. That's the reason I asked that.
It might affect your honey.
Right.
If you think you got a mite problem in the middle of summer, in June or July, and you want to address it then, you can go ahead and use that.
That was my understanding too. This is probably the only one out there that you can use during honey flow. Okay? And this has been really hard to get the last 2 or 3 years, hasn't it?
We actually last year sucked for getting stuff.
Yeah.
But we were able to get that for whatever reason.
Yeah.
What's the name of that one?
Hop Guard, HOPGRD. I'm very serious. Yes.
We have 2 questions actually.
Go ahead.
Are we going to talk about how to capture a swarm of bees? Because we do have bees that are in a tree on our property. It'd be great to capture them and put them in a hive.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other question is there recommended spacing when you have multiple hives as far as how far apart you keep them?
There's not anything recommended as far as how close. I always say that you want to be able to work with them. I've seen beekeepers, especially commercial beekeepers, they'll stack them a foot apart, close proximity. So, yeah, I like to give mine 2 to 3 feet. That way, 3 feet, particularly if I can get between, I need to get to the side of them. I have that ability.
I got a question for him. Mother Earth has a bee vacuum for when there is swarms and stuff like that. And Mother Earth is a news book that comes out, and they're building vacuums to suck up bees that have that stuff.
So you suck it up like out of a tree?
No.
Oh.
So actually vacuums are really good for hives that have lodged in the sidewall of a house or in places like that. For swarms, a vacuum really is not effective. But if you'll get a lot of calls, if somebody finds out you're a beekeeper, hey, I've got a hive in my roof or in the corner of my house or in my soffit or in the wall. And that's when vacuums become really effective.
So how do we can we capture the one that we have out in our woods in a tree?
Out of the tree,
Yeah.
cut the tree down.
Break the limb off.
Cut the tree down?
And that's one avenue of doing it, yes.
What do you do once you cut the tree down?
Well, you've got to find the queen. You have got to find the queen or you're not ever going to get that hive.
And then do you just grab the queen?
Yeah, if you can get her and her hive, yeah, we're really all over the place here. That hive is not going to do anything that queen doesn't direct. So if you can capture the queen, get her in your hive, put her in a queen cage and put her in her hive, you won't have no problem getting the rest of the hive. The challenge with it in a bee tree is you're going to have a hard time finding her. I'm going to be real honest with you. She's going to have comb. They're going to have comb everywhere. And she's got hiding places that you won't never be able to see. So finding her is really a challenge. Now, we used to, when I was a kid, and somebody had a bee tree to fall, logger, drop a bee tree and find out, oh, he had bees in his tree. What we would do is we'd block off one end, put our hive at the other end, or if it was a limb knot and the bees were going in and out of it, we'd take our hive body and set at the base end where they cut because it's hollowed out, and then we would smoke them from the knot entrance in and try to smoke them out. And you have to be really patient because she's not going to leave her brood until she absolutely has no other option. But if you can ever get her to come out of there, you're home. You'll get your hive.
Can we collect the honey from them?
Yeah.
Oh.
Oh yeah, that tree honey, that's some good wild honey. That's good stuff. Yeah, you can. So yes, to answer your question, we are going to talk about catching swarms. There's not a lot to it, but there is and there isn't. So we want to spend some time with that probably in lesson 3. Yeah. Yes.
Quick question, you were talking about, once you get started out and you're adding your second box, putting your super on there, and you're saying that if we don't expand, they're going to swarm. Now, how do you determine, or when you've taken it as far as you want to go, as big as you want to go, what do? Or every year gonna have to keep adding additional boxes, create additional hives?
So if you get to a maximum level and you don't want to do anything else with your hive, they are eventually going to swarm. The honeybee is one of two. There's over 25,000 species of bees. The honeybee and the tropical stingless, which is basically a South American bee that we never see up here, are the only two bees in that insect scientific realm that are considered perennial bees, meaning they reproduce themselves. And they do it through the process of swarming, number one, and through the process of keeping honey stores away from their brood chamber or their brood area. So that is their method, and they reproduce themselves. Every spring, if a hive is strong, in the social order of this hive, they know that their process is, by nature, to produce a new queen and create a new swarm. Okay? So there are some signs that you can watch for to see that happening. And you watch for these things within inspection of your hive. So in the spring, when you're looking into that hive, one of the first things that I look for is basically my number of drones. If I see an explosion of drone population, that tells me something's going on. Then I watch for queen cells. Queen cells are peanut-shaped cells that they attach to the side. That's actually where the queen egg is laid. She'll lay a queen egg, and they'll fill it with royal jelly, seal it up. When you see queen cells, you know swarm's on its way. You got 16 days to get ready for it. So you have to determine what process you want to take from it. To be honest with you, I've tried to take all them queen cells out and keep them from swarming. Ain't happening. Once they get the mindset of swarming, you might as well accommodate them. So you can split the hive, or you can let them swarm and try to catch the swarm. Your percentages go down dramatically when you try to catch a swarm, because you have no clue or idea when they come out of that hive where they're going. You can't direct that. You can't control that. But splitting the hive, you can control, and you can determine what you do with it. So you have more control with that. But spring of the year, that's their nature, to reproduce. So you have to get ready for that. The other time that they swarm is when they run out of room. So anytime they swarm, you're going to lose half of your hive. And I've even seen hives swarm more than once. So 2 queen eggs hatched, swarmed with one of them. 2 days later, the other took off with another portion of the. So what happens is your hive is really diluted in numbers, and it really weakens the hive.
They'll rebuild, right?
They will if they have the ability to, time-wise and forage-wise. So there's more risk involved, is what I'm saying to you. If you can catch the swarm, you're a lot better off. Or if you can split the hive, you're much better off. Splitting the hive, is the most effective way to do it as far as insurance that you're going to save the bees. And I've split a lot of hives. And what I do is I go through. You have to go through each box, each frame, every frame with a queen cell. You got to do one or two things. You've either got to take the queen cells out of here, or you've got to capture the old queen and move her out. The natural process will be when the queen cells are hatched, right before it hatches, that queen cell will start make a piping sound. That's the signal to that hive that she's fixing to hatch. Mother queen and half of the hive leave to start over. So the natural process is for mother queen to leave, but they'll get along either way. If you don't capture mother queen and you want to take the queen cells, which is typically the easier way, take every frame that has a queen cell on it and move it out of this hive and put it in another hive and take it away from proximity of this hive until the queen hatches and she becomes a viable queen.
When you say take it away, how far?
I've gotten away with 1/4 mile.
Wow.
They recommend 2 miles, but I've gotten away with 1/4 mile successfully.
So you take all of the cells.
So basically what I do is I take 5 frames with queen cells. If I have a lot more frames, I'll go to peeling them off. I want to take about 5 or 6 frames out of my healthy hive full of bees. I want to make sure there's some brood in there. I want to make sure there's some honey in there. I want to see some pollen. I want to see some nectar, not necessarily pollen, but nectar. And I want to see that I've got all the ingredients that a hive needs to start over, okay? Because I got a brand new queen, and this new queen is going to take a maiden flight, and she's going to have to breed before she's going to become a productive queen. So my risk is a little higher with that. So I used to think that I need to get rid of all the queen cells but one. Forget that. Let them determine who the strong queens is. Yeah. So I want to make the important thing that I have to stress. If you leave the old queen in this hive, make absolutely certain you get all queen cells. All frames with queen cells. If you happen to miss a queen cell, the old gal will take flight on you, and you'll have a double split in your hive. And I don't want to make that sound scary or hard, because it's not, but you have to really examine your frames and make sure that you get all the queen cells. If you're moving the queen cells and leaving mama queen here, that's fine. You just have to make sure you get all the queen cells. I take 5 or 6 frames out of here. If I have more frames with queen cells, then I peel off the queen cells. 5 or 6 frames, you're going to have probably half a dozen, maybe 10 queen cells. Let them determine the strong one.
Okay, what's the process for moving mother queen out of? Do you have to cage her?
You have to catch her and take the same contents as far as frames, but you'll have to catch her and make sure she stays caught until you get them moved away 1/4 to half a mile or a mile. The reason we put the distance in there is so that the bees don't interact. And especially if you take mother queen away, well, either way, you want to, because all of the bees are used to her pheromone, that's been their calling card. So you have to put the distance so they don't go from this hive to her hive or vice versa.
Go back home.
Yeah, go back home. Okay. Somebody had a question?
That got it.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
What do you use to mark your queen with? Are you marking her?
I'm not fast enough.
Oh, you're not fast enough to mark her?
You got to be fast.
Okay.
Oh, unless you catch her and put her in a cage. So there is color coded years for each year. What's the color this year? White is your color for this year. If you mark her and dot her white on her back, that actually helps you find her a lot easier. It also helps you know how, providing you have an idea of her age. If you get her in a nuke, she should be within a year old. And you'll be able to tell if she's brand new, but that helps you determine her age down the road. Hopefully you'll get 4 good years out of her before she starts becoming weaker. Yeah.
But in that, her becoming weaker, don't they go ahead and have a new queen ready, waiting in the wings, so to speak?
Well, every spring they're going to produce a new queen. She may get weaker up till she's 6 years old, just not laying as strong, very mature. But until she gets injured, they won't move her out. Right, right.
Can you
But
force the queen? If she's getting weak and she's being detrimental to the hive because she's not producing enough, can we remove her and will that force them to make a new queen?
no,
No?
if you remove her before she lays a queen cell, you need to buy a queen and put in there to replace her. Because worker bees don't have the ability to lay queen cells. She does.
You said we only have like 16 days from the time they start laying the queen cells till they hatch. So when should we be like really, really checking to make sure that that's not happening?
So,
What month, I mean?
oh, what month do normal? Well,
What month is that happening?
swarming, a lot depends on temperature with swarming. We're probably at the point of starting to see swarm. I haven't heard anybody swarming yet. Have you, Al?
Not this far north.
Right.
Somebody right on the Arkansas line.
Yeah. So temperature is a huge factor, and we're right on the verge of starting to see swarm season. Your best swarm months are May and June. Typically, your strongest swarms will be late April if the weather's cooperative, May. Then as June and July come along, you'll see weaker swarms. They'll still swarm, but they'll be weaker. Boy, did I have fun doing that now. I've spent years catching swarms. It's a lot of fun. Not hard. A lot of fun. A lot of fun. And free bees. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
I've heard there's a spray that's attractant to bees. You can take like one of your brood boxes, put some frames in it, go set it out, and spray some of that inside those boxes.
Mm-hmm.
And these swarms that come out will go to that. You can catch them like that.
So, very good point. The gentleman said that there's boxes that you can set up. There are bee traps or bee boxes that you can set out. So what happens when swarming process takes place? So I can give you a little background. When a hive decides that it's going to swarm, she lays queen cells, and we got queen cells laid. We got 16 days. Scout bees go out to find a place for them to be going, where they're going to make their new home. You, as a beekeeper, can put up a nuke box, build a box. You can put out a hive body. Lemongrass oil works really good to spray. You have to be careful using honey. I have used old frames that were empty and misted them down with lemongrass oil. But using the real McCoy honey draws you a lot more insects than what you want. So you have to be really kind of careful with that. But if you'll put that box about 15 to 17 foot up in the air, the book will tell you anyway, and face it south-southeast, there's a good chance that you can catch a swarm. Now, you don't necessarily have to always put it in the air. You can set it out there somewhere close to your bee yard or somewhere close. You can catch swarms. Al Markley over here at the hardware catches half a dozen to 7 or 8 swarms every year. And he's got a method and it works. But it's a great opportunity to increase the hives that you have in your bee yard. It's a great opportunity to have new bees. There is some drawbacks you want to be careful of. You don't know what you're catching. You don't have a clue what the genetics are. And like this lady said, do I need to put Apivar strips in my nukes? If you catch a swarm, I'd treat them. You don't know if it's a hive-bombed swarm or what's happened there, what's going on there. So you just have to take steps to be precautious and know what you have, and you'll learn as you go. But like I say, you've got a free hive of bees, but there are steps that you need to take to help serve that. Okay. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
How contagious are the Varroa mites? I mean, my neighbor's got bees, and if I possibly have the mites, can they transfer to his bees by?
Mhm. They can fly. Mhm.
So they can.
He's probably already got them anyway.
Okay.
They're like ticks. Find a farm where they don't have them.
Okay.
You know, Varroa mites are a serious issue. Varroa mites and hive beetles are the two main pests you're going to have in this area, and we'll talk about hive beetles. Hive beetles are a little easier to control. The Varroa mite has been very destructive for a lot of folks over the course of the past 5 years. Okay? Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Something else that I've read about are the wax moths. Do we have a problem with that here?
You will. The biggest problem you have with wax moths is in the fall. And weak hives are the ones that are most susceptible. A strong hive can fend and guard the front and take care of itself. A weak hive, wax moths they'll decimate a hive in a matter of a day or two. They're a serious issue. We're going to talk about them. But the sad part about wax moths is there's no surefire remedy. But it is something you have to be aware of in the fall of the year because they can be bad. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
If you do catch a swarm, would you also leave it alone, like from not harvesting for that first year?
I would. Yeah. So the question was, if you do catch a swarm, would you leave it alone from not harvesting the first year? My suggestion would be yes. I would let them build, become strong, get your foundation structured in good order, and then the following year, when they come out of spring, you should come out strong out of the gate and be able to then to make them a productive hive. Yes, sir.
Is foul brood an issue in this area?
Not too much. Used to be in the 70s, foul brood was a pretty serious issue. We don't see a lot of it now. And if you have foul brood, you're in a quarantine situation. So, but I haven't heard of a bee yard being quarantined with foul brood in a long time. Yeah, a long time. Long time. Big long. Yeah, it's just not the issue anymore.
Back to the mites.
Okay.
I'm thinking, trying to take precautions. Would anything like treating the ground with dimetris earth or anything like that help with that?
There's a lot of people that treat the ground with diatomaceous earth. You can. There's also thank you, nematode that you can treat the ground with. And actually, I've done that. And actually, the Bees Alive Club, they're ordering those nematodes right now. You can take them, put them in a bucket of water. There's so many of them, put them in a bucket of water and just pour out around the ground. And they take care of them hive beetles in the ground. And they work, and they're very effective and not that expensive. So yes, nematodes is a great source. Diatomaceous earth is as well.
And how do you find these nematodes?
So go online, go on the Bees Alive Club Facebook page. Loretta Klosky is the girl that's ordered them. I can give you her phone number. She turned in the order?
Yeah.
So you better call her quick to see if she can get it added.
That was just to get the amount that we could get the price.
Yeah, yeah. What was it, like $14 for a...
$14, and then we're gonna split the shipping of it. I think it's $17.
Yeah.
Just order it separately.
So I'll give you Loretta's number. You call her today, see if she can get you in a mix of it. Because the nematode, and the thing about the nematodes is once you treat the ground, they stay. They're there. It's not like you have to do it every year, I don't think.
With diatomaceous earth, is it dangerous for bees?
Well, typically your bees are not going to be on the ground feeding. And if you were to put it on the flowering part of a plant, it would be yes. But on the ground, you should be okay.
Because I didn't even think about it. I use diatomaceous earth all the time.
Yeah. It's a natural resource. Yeah. So you can get along with it. I wouldn't put it on the front of my hive or anything like that, but yeah, as far as the ground cover, you'll be fine. Should be fine.
And then also, so I've got 40 acres, and it's pretty densely wooded, and I kind of use it as like a camping spot right now. We're trying to develop it more, but I take friends out there. we camp and stuff, and I tell them, like, don't put anything on the ground that you don't want to put in a cup of water and drink, you know? I don't want chemicals out there, whatever. But bug spray is something that I have been really paranoid about, and I don't know if that is founded or not. I don't know if people coming out spraying bug spray all over themselves, wandering around and stuff. Is that something should I chill out about that, or okay?
Yeah.
I just like to see deep and stuff.
Sure, sure. Yeah, I think you're fine. The thing that you have to remember, the honeybee typically works the flowering of the flower part of the plant. So, you know, leaf, ground cover, a lot of that's not so dangerous as what it can be. When you spray the flowering piece of your vegetable garden, stuff like that, and people get along fine with treating the garden with chemicals. You just close up your hive, let the dry-in time take place, and it's okay. I mean, you're going to have some loss, a little bit of loss, but you won't decimate your whole hive by doing that.
My buds are going to love that.
Yeah. Yes.
So as long as it's dry, it doesn't hurt them?
Well, if you spray, let's say if you sprayed the nectar follicles of a plant and it had a chemical on it, that would be detrimental to the bee. Mm-hmm. Most spraying applications, though, are not applicable to the flowering part of a plant. So soybeans and corn and all that is usually sprayed long before there's a bloom session in that plant. Same with fruit trees. Now, fruit trees you should spray prior to bloom stage, dormant stage, and then after the bloom stage. But, you know, you got to be mindful of all these little things to protect your bees. Yes, sir?
Once you have it all set up and established, are you able to move it? Is that detrimental if you decide that it's just in a bad location, inconvenient for some reason or another, or too close to your property line, your neighbors have a problem? Can you move your hive to another place?
So the question was, can you move your hive to another place based on the circumstances if you may have originally put it in a bad place? The answer to that is, the theory is 2 feet, 2 miles. So what you're going to find, if you move this hive 6 feet over to the end of the hive, you're going to see bees coming right back to this spot right here. So if you're just going to move a matter of feet, I would inch my hive step at a time. If I've got to move to a new location, I would wait till fall of the year when they're dialed down to a smaller cluster and they're not foraging for honey source, then I would move them. Okay. You can put them in bad locations. You can accidentally do that, or the location circumstances can change and you have to move them. If you have to move them mid-year, go in at night when everybody's in the hive, close the hive up, button this down with a good strap, load them and move them overnight through the night hours. Do not do it in the middle of the day when you got half the bees out of there. So at night when they all come back in, go out there, you'll contend with a couple of guard bees, close the front entrance, take you a strap and strap this hive so it makes sure that it holds together good and it doesn't get jimmied in the process of moving. Then you can move them wherever you want to. Okay? And that's mid-year, I'm talking when you're in the heat of season. A lot of commercial producers move their hives. You've seen trailer trucks of hives turn over or flying down the road. They do that process and they have to go in the night, close them up, strap them down, load them on, and then go. And it's just part of it. They do it for a living, yes.
So if you move them at night, they can find their hive the next morning versus moving them?
Yeah, yeah. I got to be honest with you and tell you, when you go to dinking around with a hive at night, you better be ready. I mean, if you don't get this closed up, you're going to be a big black bear out of the woods, and they're going to cover you up. They don't like to be messed with after dark in particular, so make sure you get the front entrance closed up. I actually get screen door screen and cut it about the length of my entrance and cut it about a 4-inch strip and fold it and stuff the fold in the hive. That allows them some airflow, but it also makes that 4 inches, helps it to be stationary to where it won't just come out. And that kind of protects me most of the time. Most of the time.
If you strap the top down and you've got like one of those screens up there, they still won't be able to get out of that.
No, they can't come out of this screen at all anyway, because if you've got, this is all flush on one side, so if you have it face down on top of the hive, they're not coming out of there, period. That's what it's designed for. Okay, anybody else? Any other questions?
Explain what you've got the queen, the drone. Could you explain what each one of them do in the colony? There's guard bees.
Next week I'm going to do that.
Okay.
We're going to talk about, next week we're going to go into the actual honeybee, their social order, what that all looks like in the hive. And this is my favorite, because you get to talk about the social order, and it's absolutely fascinating to understand and know. And when you get into your bees, to watch, to see what you've learned, it's fun. It's a lot of fun. Thank you very much for being here today. Look forward to seeing you next Saturday at 9 a.m. sharp.